Hello everyone. Today we are having the live session for Modern Indian Architecture, NOC 23 AR 14. The course instructor for this course is Professor Prabjot Singh Chani, and I am the course TA. I am Shreya Shukla, and just a second. Yeah, so we will wait for 5 minutes for other people to join, and then we will start the session. Let's just wait for 5 minutes for others to join, and we will start the session in 5 minutes. To clarify one thing, we only are going to solve previous year questions. We are not going to do this year's questions. We are only going to do previous year's questions. We will wait for 5 minutes for others to join, and then we'll start. We'll start at 6:05. It's been 5 minutes. We will start with the session. Others can join while in the meeting. So whoever joined later, let me just introduce myself again. Hi, I'm Shreya Shukla. I'm currently doing PhD at IIT Roorkee, and I am the course TA for this course, and I will be taking live sessions for 8 weeks every Monday from 6 to 8. So today we're having the live session for Modern Indian Architecture. The course instructor for this course is Professor Prabjot Singh Chani. He is a professor at IIT Roorkee. So moving forward, we will start with the session. Just to clarify one thing, that I would only be doing the previous year questions because that's what I'm instructed to do. I would not be solving this year's questions because that's what you are supposed to do to fulfill the requirements of this course. And second, if you have any doubts, if you have any questions, you can leave your questions or your doubts in the chat box, and I would try to answer all the questions as per my capability and my understanding. In case I would not be able to deliver an answer to you at this moment right now, I would definitely provide you, I will research on it, I will read about it, and I will provide you with an answer in the next class. So, starting with, so the outline of this course. So, when we're saying modern Indian architecture, what are we actually meaning by it? So, the term modern in super layman language or in very simple terms, it just means up to date, just like contemporary, like till now, up to date, what is currently going on. That's what modern is. For example, if somebody would be existing in the Egyptian era, then that was modern to them. And now we are existing at this time. So what is happening right now is modern to us, while Egyptian architecture is old to us. So modern is just up to date. Now, modern Indian architecture. So modern Indian architecture would be the Indian architecture we have right now in today's time. The Indian architecture, the contemporary Indian architecture that we see in today's time is the modern Indian architecture. So this course will basically cover the evolution of modern architecture in India from pre-independence to the present time. And this evolution will be seen through various modern trends, building typologies, many buildings over a span of nearly a century, of many architects, many famous architects like Charles Correa, Louis Icahn and others, who have made a significant contribution in the development of modern Indian architecture. And then this course would be concluded with the study of 21st century Indian architecture, highlighting several emerging concepts we have right now. So this is the timeline that this course would be covering. If you have seen the lectures, you would have come across this timeline. I'm just adding it just to give a head start or to give an introduction of the course before we start with the question answer session. So this course, this is the timeline that I have borrowed from the NPTEL lecture itself. So these are the points that are going to be covered in this course. So first we have pre-independence part, which covers 3 points: Indo-Sasanic architecture, colonial architecture, in which we will talk about Lutyens, Delhi and Robert Breaker's work, and then Art Deco, how Art Deco came in India, how Mumbai is the second city with the most number of Art Deco buildings, the impact of colonialism and other things that has led to that transformation. Then we will talk about modernism in India and its impact in India, and we will also talk about revivalism, which was actually affected by the nationalist movement after independence. So, and then there would be a part of this whole NPTEL course which would talk about the Western architects in India who have contributed a lot in Indian architecture, like Louis Icahn, Le Corbusier, Jean-Pierre Jeanneret, and then the first generation of Indian architects who studied abroad but came back to India and then transformed the architecture of India, like Charles Correa, A.P. Kanande, Hasmukh Patel, Habib Rahim and others. A part would also talk about the CWD carried projects in which they have combined modernism and the traditional Indian architecture. So those works would be discussed. Then critical regionalism, which is a very important part of Indian modern Indian architecture, which basically means how modern architecture, how we have taken inspiration from modern architecture and then interpreted it in our own way, responding to the local condition of the Indian subcontinent. And then a part would also cover about post-liberalization and then contemporary developments that have happened, and then the environmental consciousness that has come across after all the development that we have had, and then a search for a new architecture, in the sense that from whatever we have learned about modern Indian architecture from pre-independence to 21st century era, how that history is basically shaping the identity of modern Indian architecture and how it may impact the future of it, on how the future would actually look like. And there would also be a part that would cover the Western architects who have settled in India and influenced the modern Indian architecture, like Joseph Allen Stein and Laurie Baker, Christopher Benninger, and others. So these are the course objectives. So first is to understand the evolution of modern architecture in India via structure, function and form. Structure, function and form is the Vitruvius triad. Then the individual work of iconic architects to understand their design approach. Uh, Third is to understand the various forces that impacted the modern Indian architecture. Fourth is the upcoming concepts such as energy efficiency, green buildings. We have now different ratings like Griha and others. Seismic safety, software tools, new technologies, material and construction techniques, and others. And then the last is to understand the concepts and ideas about various building typologies, which whoever is learning the course, be it a master student or a PR student, they can directly apply in their design studios. So today we will be doing assignment 1 from week 1. The week 1 had 5 lectures, and this was the week 1 syllabus. Introduction part 1 and introduction part 2. It was an introduction to what would be covered in the course and what modern Indian architecture would in general be about, so that you have a good information that what you are going to move forward with. Then pre-independence architecture part 1, in which Indo-Saracenic architecture was covered, and then pre-independence part 2, in which colonial architecture and Art Deco was covered. Then pre-independence to independence part 1 was covered in this, and then the part 2 would be covered in week 2. This lecture also talked about Art Deco, especially in detail about Mumbai. So now starting with the questions. If you have any doubts throughout this lecture, please feel free to write your questions or doubts in the comment box, and I would reply to them when I see them and after I'm done with the questions. And I'll just start with it, just one, excuse me. Sorry, I'm not doing very well today. So first question is, what does the term formitas refer to in the Vitruvian triad? Form, functionality, structure, or aesthetic? So this would be actually my general pattern of solving these questions. I would read the question to you first, and then I would talk about the background of this question to provide you a knowledge, and then we would go to the answer. That is going to be the pattern throughout these lectures. So Vitruvius was a great architect, philosopher, and many other things, engineer, artist. And his book is one of the oldest books we have right now with us available on architecture. And in one of his books, he gave this triad that he said that these 3 things are the most important things for architecture, in which he said formitas, utilitas, and venustas. So formitas means firmness, loosely translated from Latin to English. Utilitas means commodity, venustas means delight. So formitas means firmness or durability, which talks about the structure, the structural integrity of a building, or in general, let's say, any kind of built form. The durability, the construction quality, all those things would be covered in structure, which is formitas. It should stand up robustly and it should remain in a good condition. That is one most important point. Second is utilitas, which means commodity or the utility, that it should be useful. The place that you are designing or the building that is there, it should be useful and it should be functional well, so that people can easily use it. So it should have a functional adequacy, a usefulness to it. It should satisfy the requirements of the building. And then venustas, which is basically aesthetics, delight and beauty, loosely translated to, directly translated to proper English. It means delight and beauty, but it represents the aesthetic part, that it should be delightful for people to look at, and people should feel joy and people should feel good looking at a building. So the 3 important parts of the Vitruvian triad is formitas, utilitas, and venustas. Formitas, the structure; utilitas, the function; and venustas, the aesthetics. So our question was, what does the term formitas refer to in the Vitruvian triad? So very clear, it means the structure. Moving to the second question. Uh, the transformation of cities and homogenizing built environment is the impact of, and then four options have been given. So the question is saying that the transformation of cities that has taken place over these years, which has led to a homogenized built environment. A homogenized built environment means that it is homogeneous. It looks the same everywhere. It does not have a unique or a different identity. It's all homogeneous. So the transformation of cities that has led to the homogenizing built environment. So what the a few factors have been lifted, and what do you think amongst these factors is the right answer to it? So, impact of globalization on architecture we'll talk about here. So, globalization is nothing but the connection of different parts of the world, and it is right now possible because we are connected in every way possible, especially via internet. Now we have access to all kinds of information. We can approach anybody, we can communicate with anybody, and we can always obtain any kind of information about anything, which is all a result of globalization. We have better traveling ease now. Everybody is going around the world to study, so it's all a part of globalization. It has Globalization has basically led to the expansion of international cultural, economic, and political activities to a very great extent. So, globalization is an inevitable thing, it was bound to happen, and it has many advantages, a few of them that I just listed right now. And one of the biggest advantage of globalization is the ease by which anyone around the world can connect with anyone. And amongst all the advantages that globalization has provided us, we have also come across a few of the negative impact of globalization. Right now we would be talking about specifically the impact of globalization on architecture. So globalization on architecture has had a very negative impact in the sense that it has homogenized the built environment. What homogeneity typically means in English language, homogeneity means the quality or state of being of a similar kind or of having a uniform structure or composition throughout. So homogeneity basically means to have a uniform structure throughout, or to be in a state of being similar. So there is this graphic. This is a comic developed by Libordis. If you know, they make really well comics, and they are architecture graduates who have started this, and they make really insightful comics. So they made this comics in which they have shown that the architecture of Asia, Russia, Europe, and South America having very different styles, having very distinct identities, having very different features which are shaped by a lot of reasons: socio-cultural reasons, politics, religion, economic status, technological development. A lot of reasons have shaped these architectural identities of all the places in the world. But right now, because of globalization, it has become the same throughout. All you see is glass facades, uh, modern built, minimalist, or not exactly minimalist, but futuristic looking, but it's all glass facades everywhere, and all the typical elements that gave a unique identity to different kinds of architecture of different places is somehow being lost right now. So because of globalization, the built environment is now faceless and neutral. That it's very neutral. You don't see any distinctive identity. For example, if you look at the images that are provided on the right hand side, let's forget what is the name written over there. If you look at it, you can't say which country or which state it belongs to, or which continent it belongs to, or which city it belongs to, which region it belongs to. You just can't say, because it is something that can be placed all around the world, anywhere, because it's just the same thing. It's neutral, it's faceless, and it has led to the loss of uniqueness in architecture that was shaped earlier because of the cultural, social, economic, and religious context. And similar buildings and spaces are coming out everywhere, which is not responding to the regional context right now. So that is what the impact of globalization has had on architecture. So our question was again that the transformation of cities and homogenizing built environment is the impact of. And This I have gathered from the NPTEL lecture myself and on my own research. So according to me, the answer should be globalization of architecture, because in the first slide it was very clearly stated this way. Although that the answer script that has been given to us, that says all of these points. So I would actually, because Professor Chani is in my department itself, I would just confirm this with him once, that what would actually be the right answer, and I would tell you this in the next class. So according to me, it should be globalization of architecture, because that is the main reason that the homogenizing built environment is coming into play right now. But the answers said all of these, so I would just discuss with Chani sir once, and I'll let you know what would be the correct answer. Moving on to our next question. Just a second. Uh, Slide is not, you're saying the slide is not moving. Okay, I'll just stop sharing and I'll share it again. I'll just answer the questions that I've written. Should we note this down? You don't, it's up to you. Most of this information is given in the NPTEL lectures, Tamanna. And if you find anything that is not in the NPTEL and that you learned something new from this, you can note it down. These are just previous year questions. These are only going to help you write the exam better when you would be writing the exam for this course. And would we learn about the influence of Portuguese on architecture around Goa? Uh, Probably not, because that word, maybe, I have actually not gone through all the lectures, but as far as I know, we are covering a little part from the pre-independence and till the modern right now after post-liberalism. So I'm not sure if that would be covered, but yeah, I would let you know in the further slides. And others are saying that the slides are not visible. I'm so sorry. I'll just again show you the slides. Sorry. Can you guys let me know if it is visible now, and if it is, if I am, when I'm scrolling through it, if it's changing the slide number? Just please let me know. Is it changing now, the slide number? Okay. So would you like me to repeat the 3 questions that I have done, or should we move forward? Whatever you want, I can repeat it again, because the slides were not visible. Yeah, sure, I'll repeat. So, yeah, this is the course timeline that has been given in the NPTEL lecture itself. These are the different part of it that has been covered. Then we talked about the course objectives, in which we talked about what all different aspects would be covered in this course. For example, the evolution of modern architecture in India via structure, function and form, the individual work of iconic architects during this time, the various forces that have impacted modern Indian architecture, and the upcoming concepts such as energy efficiency, green buildings, seismic safety, software tools and others. And then concepts and ideas about various typologies which students can directly apply in the design studios, because you would be learning about different concepts and different ideas, and especially learning about the design ideologies of famous and iconic architects, especially who have worked towards Indian architecture. And this was week 1 syllabus. We will not go there. We will start with question number 1. So, what does the term formitas refer to in the Vitruvian triad, which asks form, functionality, structure, and aesthetic? So, the Vitruvian triad. Vitruvian was a very famous architect, philosopher, artist, engineer, and many other things. So he gave this triad regarding architecture, which said formitas, utilitas, and venustas. It is in Latin. It directly translates to English: formitas to formness, venustas to delight, and utilitas to commodity. So formitas means structure, venustas means aesthetics, and utilitas means the functionality or the usefulness of the space. So because our question asks what does formitas mean, so our answer is structure. Then second, the transformation of cities and homogenizing built environment is the impact of, uh, four options have been given: traffic patterns, globalization on architecture, and regional politics. So when I was talking about this question, I was talking about that how, when I was reading about this and when I was going through the NPTEL lecture and what I was searching on, it specifically states in the lecture that the main reason that the homogenizing built environment is happening right now is because of the globalization of, global impact of globalization on architecture. However, the answer that has been provided to us stated that all of these reasons are the reasons. And I was saying that I would just once confirm with Professor Chani and would let you know in the next class. So when I was talking about here, I was talking about how globalization has actually impacted architecture. And what homogeneity really means is uniform structure or the uniformity. So homogeneity basically means that everything is same. It's as simple as that, that everything is really same. So what has happened because of globalization is that now the whole world has the access to all kinds of technology, all kinds of information. So the previously when we had specific characters in different identities of architecture in different places of the world. For example, you can see in this comic strip that I have added here from Leodis that all these continents, they have very different style of architecture. Although you cannot define architecture style of one continent by one style, because the style changes with regions and a lot of reasons. Although, but just to depict it in a common way here. And this was earlier, and right now how it is that it's all the same buildings everywhere. All you see is buildings, skyscrapers made of glass, steel, and you see glass facades everywhere. Uh, with And it doesn't matter on the context. For example, that the country we live in, it's a country which we have a lot of places have composite climate. We have a lot of arid climate, hot and humid climate. And because of this globalization and because these buildings are not being made according to the regional context, so we are just creating glass facades and creating problems for ourselves and not respecting the architecture that actually used to exist earlier. So this is what globalization has done, that it has created homogeneous architecture everywhere. For example, if you see the glass building that has been shown in all the parts that we have now in this picture. So if you pick this building, you can never say which country it belongs to until and unless it's not an iconic building. If it's an iconic building, for example, we have Zaha Hadid structures or something else, or Frank Gehry structures. So we all know that, yeah, it belongs in this place. But when you actually look at a building or a normal skyscraper, can you tell which city it would belong to or which country it would belong to? You can't, because they all look very similar. So that is what homogeneity means. So as I was saying, that I think the correct answer of this would be globalization of architecture, that the impact of globalization on architecture has transformed the cities and created this homogenized built environment. And I would just discuss it with Chancellor once and let you know. Moving forward to the third question. So contemporary Indian architecture is distinguished by, we have been given four options: remnants of British colonialism, high-tech architecture, consumer capitalism replacing decaying functionalism of socialist society. This is a very complicated sentence that has been written here, and I would just explain it to you right now. And then the dominating influence of European architecture. So first is the remnants of British colonialism, in which basically very clearly means that we were a colonized country, and then when Britishers left, we still have remnants of British colonialism here with us. Then high-tech architecture is an architectural style movement which has come in postmodern eras. And then dominating influence of European architecture, which very clearly means the influence of European architecture on Indian contemporary architecture. And this consumer capitalism replacing the decaying functionalism of socialist society. So to explain this sentence, I would talk about what is a socialist society and what is consumer capitalism. Basically, this sentence means that the socialist society has been replaced by the capitalist society right now, and if that has impacted the contemporary Indian architecture. So moving forward, so what is a capitalist economy or a capitalist society or a socialist society? So a capitalist economy is a system where entities control the factor production like labor, natural resources or capital goods. And a socialist economy is an economic system where the factors of production like labor, natural resources or capital goods are under the control of the government. So this is the main difference. So when we talk about capitalist society and we talk about socialist society, in socialist society, the production of goods and the role of government is super strong and it's all under the role of the government. While in a capitalist society, it is all private entities hold the factor of production and these powers. So what is the main motive of capitalist society is to earn profit. Capitalist society only looks towards profit and it does not think about other factors, while socialist society, the main focus is the welfare of the general public. So in capitalist society there is minimal or no role of the government in the capitalist economy, while in a socialist economy the government has complete control over the production and services. So in India, what happened after a while, because of liberalization is a movement that basically states the change from socialist society to capitalist society. So when liberalization came towards India, so this happened that we changed from a very socialist society to a more capitalist society. So what was Indian architecture pre-liberalization? So during it before liberalization came to India, the traditional spaces in contemporary contexts were reinterpreted. This is Indian Habitat Center, a picture of Indian Habitat Center in which the traditional element of courtyard has been used, while with a very modern and a very technologically good roof over it. So it is an example of reinterpretation of a traditional space. In this case, it is a reinterpretation of a courtyard and turning it into a modern courtyard. And now what happened after post-liberalization was that there came a boon in the architecture of consumer culture, and there were endless novelties, there were endless choices, there was access to technology, and because of which buildings just came into being, where everybody or architects or the clients and everybody was exploring different things, doing whatever they want. So this is what happened post liberalization, that we kind of lost the touch to the roots, and we kind of lost the touch of keeping in touch with our traditional identities, and we moved towards just exploring technology and doing things which was solely based on a capitalist economy. So the answer of this statement is that so the answer of this question is the contemporary Indian architecture, it is distinguished by the consumer capitalism which replaced the functionality of a socialist society. If you want to understand it in a better way, because of course I have tried my best over here, please go through the first lecture in which Professor Chani has explained it very clearly, and you would be able to understand it way better over there. Number 4, which city has the largest number of the Art Deco buildings in the world after Miami? So we have 4 options: Napier, Mumbai, Amsterdam and Singapore. So what is basically Art Deco? I would just cover what Art Deco movement is for people to understand things. Excuse me. So Art Deco is a short form for the French word arts décoratifs, and it is sometimes referred to as deco. It is a style of visual arts, architecture and product design, and it appeared in France in 1910, and it flourished in the US and Europe during the 1920s and early 1930s. Art Deco basically is an eclectic form of art that combines handcrafted traditional motifs with machine-made imageries. It is influenced by the Art Nouveau movement, which came right before Art Deco, Art Nouveau and arts and crafts movement. But the biomorphic and asymmetrical visual language that was present in Art Nouveau movement, it was changed into machine-made geometric patterns in Art Deco movement. So Art Nouveau was characterized by a lot of organic lines, lots of floral lines which was used in it. And if you know the work of Antonio Gaudi, he's one of the famous architects who was a part of Art Nouveau movement, and all these famous buildings that he has in Barcelona. I'm literally not getting the name right now. Casa Batlló and other buildings. You can look at it. So Art Nouveau had a very different style. When Art Deco came after Art Nouveau, so what happened in Art Deco was that technological advancement was already there. So what happened in Art Deco was that the traditional elements were taken and they were made more geometric, and they were and the materials that were mostly used in Art Deco movement were very machine made, very modern. For example, this is the most famous example of Art Deco movement, this building. This is Chrysler building in New York. If you can see the tip of this building, you can see the it's basically sun rays are coming out of it. So triangles have been used geometrically to represent it that way. So it's using a pattern, that is inspired from a natural source, but it has a kind of symmetry and it has a hint of modernism to it. So now the answer is actually Mumbai, and I would now discuss about the Art Deco in Mumbai. So Art Deco in Mumbai, it's a notable feature of the architecture of the city. It was used primarily, just a second, combining modern and traditional architecture. I think all the architectural styles that have come into being so far, somewhere or more or less, they have always been inspired from traditional architecture. For example, we started right from Egyptian, then Greek and Roman, then other eras kept coming. Then we had Gothic, and we had all the other styles, Byzantine, all these styles coming in between. Then once industrial revolution happened, we had machines. Then everything became again very minimal, and then again we went. This has been a cycle over the years in all these style movements, that there is some kind of technological advancement and we start making buildings very same, very similar, and then soon after people realize that, oh, everything is looking very similar now, so they go back to traditional styles and then they take inspiration from there. For example, when neoclassical came or neo-gothic came, so in neoclassical they started making modern buildings, they started making buildings, but they started taking inspiration from uh, Greek architecture, and they started using columns, the Roman columns, the Greek columns. Similarly, in neo-gothic they started taking again elements from that. So this keeps happening, it's a cycle. So of course, any kind of style that has come, it is not a style on its own. It always will have some more or less the influence of the styles that came before it, or the styles came way before it, because every style will have some kind of inspiration. So in that sense, almost all of these kinds of styles can be said that there's a new style, there's something new that is happening over in these buildings, and they are taking some kind of traditional essence. So for example, if you see this example, that this is a building in Art Deco in Mumbai. So if you see this building, it is the New India Insurance building, and you can see it was built like a normal modern building, but it draws a huge inspiration from the Egyptian elements. You can see these two huge Egyptian, I really don't know what this is called, I'm forgetting it, but you can see how these kind of structures you find in Egyptian architecture representing it. So they have taken huge inspiration from there. So yeah, it happens everywhere. And in Mumbai, during the colonial empire, during the British Empire, this Art Deco movement became quite popular, and it was primarily being used for public buildings like office buildings, residences, and movie theaters. talking specifically about the Art Deco in Mumbai, there are a few recognizable symbols that this design style included. So first was the use of ziggurats or zigzags, and then the reference to Indian mythology. So what was happening in Art Deco around the world was they were using almost all the countries in the world, like US and other places, they were using elements from Greek parts or Roman parts or Egyptian parts, for example, in this building. But what happened in Art Deco in India, that we started amalgamating our Indian mythology in that way. I don't have one image over here, but I'll show you in the next class. So for example, you can see these huge reliefs on the wall that has been inspired from Egyptian architecture. In Indian Art Deco that was prominent in Mumbai, they started using Indian mythology to use to depict. So that was something very unique to India specifically. And then the use of eyebrows, which is basically it's a chajja. Eyebrows is a word that has been it's being used here as a for a chajja. Nautical design, because Mumbai was a port city, so the structures during that time, they were highly influenced by the technologies they were coming. So these buildings, they had curved edges, streamlined bodies, being inspired from the different kinds of vehicles and other things that were happening at that time. And what we mean about nautical design here over is that nautical is related to sea, if you know. So what they took from ships, the ships, they saw ships, and what inspiration they took from ships and applied it in their buildings was the use of circular windows. If you know, the ships have these circular windows, right? So they started adding those in their buildings in Mumbai, and the railings that we have in ship, those railings or observatory towers, all those elements were added. And we just saw classic Egyptians. So the answer is Mumbai. So the most number of buildings, Art Deco buildings in the world, are in Miami, and the second largest number of Art Deco buildings in the world are in Mumbai. Uh, which amongst the following four projects have been mentioned, and you are asked to pick which of the following projects is Charles Collier's. So first we have Gandhi Smarak Sangrahalaya, Ahmedabad, also called Gandhi Ashram. Second is Hall of Nations, New Delhi. Third is Indian Habitat Center, New Delhi, and then IIM Ahmedabad. So I guess most of the people here would know who made these buildings, because these are some of the most famous buildings in India. And even if you don't, I would just tell you. So the Gandhi Ashram has been built by Charles Collier, designed by, not built by. Hall of Nations was designed by Raj Rewal, and Indian Habitat Center was designed by Joseph Allenstein, and IIM Ahmedabad was designed by Louis I. Kahn. Because so the answer is the Gandhi Smarak Sangrahalaya in Ahmedabad. So Charles Collier designed Gandhi Smarak Sangrahalaya in Ahmedabad. It is one of his most famous and pioneering architectural designs in India. And what is Gandhi Smarak Sangrahalaya? It's a memorial institution. It's a museum and a public service institution. It is dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi, and it is located at located at the bank of river Sabarmati in Ahmedabad. And the museum part of this place, it hosts letters and thousands of letters by Gandhi, lots of photographs, lots of books, and it's a good museum to visit too. I have been there. And it was designed by Charles Collier in 1958, and it was first. Oh, it was this museum was Charles Collier's first important commission, and it has originally 51 modular units like these, like you see the hut kind of units that you would see in this picture, those kinds of units. Each of these units are 6 × 6 meters, and they surround a water pond. So that's the basic design of this. So the answer to this question is A, Gandhi Smarak Sangrahalaya. So I just, this is also a general pattern that I follow in these live sessions, that whatever building is being talked about, I give a little information about that building, because when you have some information about a specific kind of building, it helps you remember things about that building. So this is something that I followed in the last year also, when last semester also, when I took another live session for another subject. So whatever building was being talked about, I used to usually define it a bit or give some facts about it. It's not going to come in your exam. Those facts are not going to come in your exam. This is just for your knowledge, because I feel, because it actually works for me, that these kinds of facts actually help me remember things better. So I'm just adding it for that. These extra facts that are not a part of your NPTEL lectures are not going to come in your exam. This is just something that I am adding from my side. Question number 6. Umaid Bhawan Palace, Jodhpur, is an example of Islamic architecture, Awadhi architecture, Indo-Saracenic architecture, or neoclassical architecture. So to answer this question, two things I would give information over here. I would just quickly define what all these four kinds of architecture in general mean and how they are characterized, and then I will show you images and give a little information about Umaid Bhawan Palace, and then we can figure out which architecture style follows them. So first is Islamic architecture. Islamic architecture is a centuries old category of architecture which is rooted in the principles of Islam. It originated in the Middle Eastern countries, and it has a strong influence over the places where Islam was there. In some European countries like Spain and Portugal, they had a huge Islamic influence. So it's basically an architecture from that area. Later on, when that architecture spread over different continents of the world, it has transformed. For example, when Islamic architecture came to India, it got transferred into something called Indo-Islamic architecture. It was an amalgamation of Indian architecture and Islamic architecture. So, but what Islamic architecture specifically is the architecture that was rooted in the principles of Islam, and this Islamic architecture is characterized by a strong sense of geometry, strong sense of geometrical motifs, which is still being used in a lot of modern architectural principles. For example, the Petronas Tower in Malaysia, the Petronas Twin Towers in Malaysia, they are the shape of a 8-pointed star, which is a very significant element of Islamic architecture. So Islamic architecture has the characteristics of Islamic architecture is they use sculptural forms, ornamental details, minarets, domes, arches. All of these are big points in Islamic architecture. Then Awadhi architecture, it is also called Lucknow architecture. So Awadhi architecture is actually a part of the Mughal architecture that was, it was influenced from Mughal architecture that was happening in India during the Mughal rule. So Awadhi architecture was basically an experiment by the Nawabs of Awadh. Awadh is a region in UP which covers Lucknow, Agra and other places. So it was an attempt to preserve the Mughal architecture by experimenting with different materials and innovating new concepts. And one of the things that is unique about Awadhi architecture as compared to Mughal architecture was that they did not use irons or marbles in their buildings. Then Indo-Saracenic architecture. Indo-Saracenic architecture is the amalgamation of Indo-Islamic and Indian architecture with Neo-Gothic and Neoclassical styles of 19th century Britain with typical building plans. So what happened in Indo-Saracenic architecture was that our existing Indian architecture and then Indo-Islamic architecture that was influenced by Islamic architecture, both these forms, when they are amalgamated with the Neo-Gothic and Neoclassical styles that was happening in Europe, especially in Britain, when these two styles are combined, then we get Indo-Saracenic architecture. And what usually happens in Indo-Saracenic architecture is that the building layout or the planning is done in a typical Western building plan. If you will see the NPTEL lecture, you will see various examples that have been added over there. But in the elevation or in the form, they add the typical traditional Indian architecture or Indo-Islamic architecture elements, which gives it a very different look. It was a revival architectural style and it was used mostly by British architects in India. Then fourth is neoclassical architecture. So what neoclassical architecture? It is sometimes referred to as classical revival architecture because in this kind of architecture, after a while in neoclassical architecture, what happened was that they started again bringing back the Roman and Greek elements and then adding them in the major buildings. And the most famous example of neoclassical architecture is the Capitol building in US, the US Capitol. And if you know how it looks like, or if you can Google it later also if you don't know. So you see how it has all these Ionic columns, or Greek Ionic columns in its front. It was produced by the neoclassical movement, which began in the 18th century Italy and France, and it is characterized by grandeur of scale, simplicity of geometric forms, Greek and Roman orders. So this is how Umaid Bhawan Palace actually looks like. I have added one bird's eye view just to give an idea of the kind of plan we have, and then one elevation to show the one view to show the typical form. So Umaid Bhawan Palace is located in Jaipur, Rajasthan. It is one of the world's largest private residences. It has 347 rooms, and a part of the palace is managed by Taj Hotels. It is named after Maharaja Umaid Singh. It is and a part of the palace is also a museum. The construction was completed in 1943, and the architects were Henry Vaughan Lanchester, Thomas Arthur Lodge, and Samuel Swinton Jacob. So, if you look at the plan of this building, if you have been through the NPTEL lecture, you would know that this is a typical layout of a Western colonial plan, well, the colonial architecture plan, or the typical Western plan that they have, characterized like this, building layouts like this. So it's a very, very typical characteristic of Western plan. And when you look closely to the form of this, you see the different elements of chhatris over here. You see that the dome of this palace is actually very much inspired by our Indian shikharas and Indo-Islamic architecture parts. So because it has a typical plan of British a very Western typical plan inspired from the British, actually a part of British colonial buildings, and a very typical added Indian elements to it. So this is actually Indo-Sasanic. Question number 7. Raj Bhavan, Kolkata is designed by Charles Watt, Adolphe Loos, Walter Gropius, or Henry Irvine. So Raj Bhavan, Kolkata is the official residence of the Governor of West Bengal. It is located in Kolkata, capital of West Bengal. It was built in 1803. It was known as the Government House before Indian independence. The owner of Raj Bhavan is the Government of West Bengal. The floor area is around 84,000 square feet. The architect is Charles Watt. And the number of rooms, there are 90 rooms with 14 washrooms in this building. And the style is colonial architecture style with a typical touch of neoclassical. And why neoclassical typical touch? Because if you can see, even in the picture above and even in the picture below, you can see the use of these Greek Ionic columns, which is very neoclassical style. So this is Raj Bhavan, and it was designed by Charles Watt in 1803. So our answer is Charles Watt. What is the name of the column situated in front of the Rashtrapati Bhavan, New Delhi? So we have been given 4 options: the Iron Pillar, Dharma Stambh, Jaipur Column, and Ashok Chakra. So this is how these 4 elements that have been mentioned look like. First is the Iron Pillar, second is the Dharma Stambh, third is the Jaipur Column, and the fourth is the Ashok Chakra in the emblem. So what are these 4 Symbols typically, I'll just talk about it quickly. So Iron Pillar of Delhi was set up by Raja Dhav in 14th century. It's a 7.2-meter high structure with a 41 centimeter dia. It was constructed by Chandragupta II, and right now it stands in the Qutub complex, which also has your Qutub Minar in Mehrauli in Delhi, India. Why is it called iron pillar, and what is it really famous for? It is basically famous for the rust resistant composition of the metals that have been used in the construction of this iron. So it's again the technological advancement at that time when Chandragupta Maurya got it constructed. So it is famous for its rust resistant composition, and that's why it's called the iron pillar. Dharm Stamp. Dharm Stamp, the pillars of Dharm Stamp is not a specific pillar or stump anywhere. Dharm Stamp is basically a term that has been given by Ashok to the pillars that he got created, the monolithic columns that he got created, and it was dispersed around the Indian subcontinent. So he used the expression Dhamma Thamba, Dharm Stamp, that is the pillar of the Dharm, to describe his own pillars. So it's not a specific one pillar, but it's a term that has been denoted to the pillars of Ashoka. Then Jaipur column. So the Jaipur column is a monumental column in the middle of the courtyard in front of Rashtrapati Bhavan, the presidential residence in New Delhi, Delhi, India. Jaipur column was built to celebrate the transfer of the capital from Calcutta to Delhi and as a token of allegiance to the princely state of Jaipur to the British Crown. So it's basically Jaipur column is a column that has been built in the courtyard of Rashtrapati Bhavan. Why it is called Jaipur column was because they wanted to denote this column as a token of allegiance between the princely state of Jaipur and the British Crown at that time when the capital was shifted from Calcutta to New Delhi, and then New Delhi was built by Lutyens and Herbert Baker when they designed the whole thing, and at that point Jaipur column was added just like a token, for example, just to show your allegiance, to get your support. That's why it is called Jaipur column. Then D, Ashok Chakra. So Ashok Chakra, we all are aware, it's in the center of our flag also. Ashok Chakra is an Indian symbol which is the depiction of the Dharma Chakra, a foundational concept in Buddhism that represents the wheel of Dharma or the path of enlightenment. It is called so because it appears on a number of edicts of Ashok, most prominent among which is the lion capital of Ashoka. So I have added one picture of the lion capital of Ashok because you can see below the lions, you can see the Ashok Chakra over there. So our question was that what is the name of the column situated in front of the Rashtrapati Bhavan, New Delhi? So our answer is, of course, because we just talked about it, it's Jaipur column. Coming to question number 9, the symbolic architectural element used in Central Secretariat, minarets, which one of the following symbolic architectural element is used in Central Secretariat? Minarets, Jali, Jharoka or Chhatri? So to be able to answer this question, you should at least be knowing what Central Secretariat looks like and what these elements actually mean. So a typical pattern that is usually in these questions that are previous year questions or the question that would be given in your exam would be based on how those buildings actually look like, what are their architectural styles. So you will have to remember those things about it, because not always a picture is going to be provided to you through which you can guess what it would be. So you would have to be knowing what these famous buildings or what these famous architectural styles look like. So this is how the Central Secretariat looks like. Central Secretariat, basically Central Secretariat in Delhi, it houses the important ministries of the Government of India. It is situated at Sina Hill, New Delhi, where the whole New Delhi plan of Lutyens Delhi, or you can call it Lutyens Delhi, was built. The Secretariat buildings are actually two blocks of symmetrical building. One is called North Block, one is called South Block, on opposite side of the great axis of Rajpath. I have an image, I'll show you here. So if you see this image, you can see one axis going right through it. So the building that we see in the middle is the Rashtrapati Bhavan, and there is an axis that is going right towards the India Gate, and on the two sides of this axis we have North Block and South Block, two buildings of Central Secretariat. So Central Secretariat is actually two buildings in the middle of which the axis is going, and it's the whole complex is called the Central Secretariat. The construction started in 1912 and it was completed in 1927. The floor area is 1,48,000 square feet. The architect is Herbert Baker, and the style is neoclassical with Mughal and Rajasthani architectural style elements and motifs. So it was a neoclassical style building in the sense that the planning, layout and the other part was neoclassical, but Mughal and Rajasthani architectural style and elements were added to it above it. The entire buildings was very neoclassical, and just some architectural element derived from different kinds of architecture was just placed on it. Here in this case it was derived from Mughal and Rajasthani architectural style and it was just placed over it. And it's very evident from the image that we have in front of us that the element that has been picked from the Rajasthani and Mughal style is the chhatri, and it has been put over it. So our answer is chhatri. Last question, question number 10. So we have only covered 1 hour, I am just realizing, and because I have only prepared 10 questions because each assignment had 20 questions, but because now I am realizing that we have a lot of time left. From the next class I would prepare more questions, I would add more questions, I would either frame those questions or I would access other previous year questions and do it. So I would include more questions so that we can utilize this time. So this is the last question we have for today. After we are done with this question, you can ask me your doubts and you can write it in the chat box. I would try to answer it to my full capacity, and if I do not know the answer to it, I would definitely answer it in the next class. And yeah. Excuse me. Who were the architects of Rasina Hill and Central Secretariat in New Delhi? So Rasina, this is the picture of the, you can say the typical New Delhi part or the Rasina Hill part. And if you see this image closely, you can see these are the two parts of the two buildings of Central Secretariat, and you can see the path. I'll just make it full screen for you. You can see the path leading right to India Gate, and this shows the symmetry that this place has been made with. So what is Rasina Hill and what is it? Basically Rasina Hill. So the region where New Delhi was developed when the capital was shifted from Kolkata to Delhi, that place, that area in Delhi was called Rasina Hill. It is used as a term for the seat of the government of India. It is an area in New Delhi and it houses India's most important government buildings, which includes the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the Secretariat building, which also includes the Prime Minister's office and several other important ministries. So making of Rasina Hill. So Rasina Hill was a vast flat land with light forest, and it included a few dilapidated and deserted structures here and there of masjid, of some palaces, of hunting lodges. So it was taken as a land and completely rebuilt to display the monarchy power of Britain. And the architects who did this whole layout and who designed these buildings were Edwin Lutyens and Herbert Baker. That's why this place is called Lutyens Delhi. Herbert Baker is the one who designed the Central Secretariat. So if you look at this plan, we have Viceroy's Hall. It was called Viceroy's Hall earlier. Now we call it Rashtrapati Bhavan. And then the access goes right to the end to India Gate. And then we have Secretariat buildings on two sides of this, and the access is called Rajpath, as we know. Secretariat buildings on two sides of it, and on the left side of the Secretariat building we have Sansad Bhavan, the Secretariat building, and on the axis from there, which goes straight away to that side, we reach the Connaught Place. So our answer to this question, that who were the architects of Rasina Hill and Central Secretariat in New Delhi? It's B. Edwin Lutyens and Herbert Baker. So if you have any questions and doubts, please write your questions in the comment box and I will try to answer them. If anyone has any doubts, please kindly ask. I know we have one more hour left, so this part is actually, I usually take 1.5 hour of question answer round, and then I give half an hour, 1.5 hours of solving previous year questions, and then I give half hour to question answer round. Today we have some time on our hands, as I did not anticipate. Yeah, Persian architecture is actually a part of Islamic architecture because that entire region is where that emerged from. So Persian architecture is, in a way, is you can say a part of Islamic architecture or influenced by. So Islamic architecture is basically the typical architecture that you see in the buildings that are associated with Islam, especially the mosques, and it has this typical elements of minarets, domes, and wherever Islam was spread slowly, it became the architecture of those places, and somehow it got intertwined with their local conditions. So yeah. I'm so sorry, I'm not well today. I'm sorry for any inconvenience caused. We will stay in the call till 7:30. If anyone has any question, you can please ask. I would make sure that I cover more questions from next time. And I hope my health would also be better by that time. Thank you so much for the message, Rashmi. Yeah. Yeah. So what basically, it's not actually typically talking about heterogeneity or homogeneity. Why we say that homogeneity spread because of globalization was because of globalization, because when we got access to all the kinds of technologies that are developing in different parts of the world, and when industrial revolution happened and then globalization happened, we had access to all kinds of technology at our end. And then in western countries, when these buildings that were technologically advanced were being built, which were using a lot of materials which was good to their context, which was responding to their context. For example, western countries are usually very cold, and they were using a lot of glass in their buildings, and that somehow became the symbol of modernity. So when across the globe, when the technology spread, when the information spread, when all of this happened, so somehow all the other countries, they just started adapting to it with the and in amidst of adapting to this modernity, so that they, what kind of architecture will these glass buildings will come? In the sense, I did not understand you, Tamanna. Could you please explain what you're asking here? So heterogeneity, you explain what you're trying to say, you write it again. I did not understand what you just asked, but I'll talk about the heterogeneity and homogeneity. So heterogeneity already existed in the world. We all had different kinds of architecture, and which was specific to our culture, to our region, religion, climate. For example, even in India, when you think about India, in south we have a lot of sloping roof structures. Why do we have that? Because in most part of it we have rains. In west, in Rajasthan, we had really thick walls. Why did we have that? Because we needed to protect ourselves from the heat. So even in India, based on the climatic condition, based on the culture, based on a lot of reasons, the architecture was different. There was heterogeneity always in architecture, in everywhere, not just continent, not just countries. It's for cities, it was regions. Heterogeneity was already there. So what globalization did was, because everybody had access to the same kind of information, everybody had access to the technology, and then somehow the glass structures, the skyscrapers, for example, they are a symbol of your economic power. They're a symbol of political power. Why do you think all these countries, they keep building taller and taller buildings? Because they want to be called the one who has the highest or the tallest building in the world. It's a symbol of power. That's only why this is happening. Skyscrapers are coming so much in the world because it shows that the more skyscrapers you have, the better economy you have. It's a status symbol. It's a political symbol. That's why there always is one country or the another who keeps making the big buildings taller and taller. Are these buildings specific to the context or the climatic condition or the region to the of that country? No, it is not. But it has become a symbol of it now. So that's why it has become so homogeneous now. All the places, they have these buildings which are being constructed in RCC or others, and then new materials, different materials, and then they're all using glass without thinking about the consequences that this kind of architecture is actually having on us. For example, in India specifically, where we have such high temperatures during a lot of time, when we are using glass facades, a lot of glass facades in our buildings, we are actually entrapping more heat. While glass was working for Western countries because they needed heat, because they were cold countries, we don't. And now to tackle that heat that we are gathering ourselves from the glass, we have active systems of conditioning, which is using air conditioners and other things. So we are completely moving away from the passive techniques that we had. For example, we used to have charokhas, we used to have jalis, we used to have cross ventilation. So we are moving away from those good architectural practices or elements that we used to have, and we have kind of moved towards creating buildings that are going around in the entire world, which somehow we are now using more air conditioner, more HVAC systems to cool our buildings down now. So this is what the homogeneity, this is what globalization has done. Yeah. From New York, but the concept of these offices buildings were from Australia, which is in Eastern Part. Yeah, so when we actually, again, it's not appropriate term to use, you can say Western countries, but yeah, I'm just explaining that to you. So it's not actually a perfect term to be used, Western architecture, but when we talk about Western architecture or Western culture, we specifically means the countries that are doing well economically. So the entire world is divided in two parts. We have countries that are still uh, uh, that are developed countries, that are developing countries. So there are few terms that have been used interchangeably over the years, but I won't say that they are specifically right terms. For example, for the developing countries and the developed countries, we have terms like global north and global south, because in general a lot of developing countries are related on the south of the equator, as compared, or most of the developing countries are related on north of the equator, but that's again not a very correct term, but it's used in that way. Global, so global north, global south, western countries, and then middle east or eastern countries. It's not a particularly right term, but it's just a way of denoting what we mean here is the countries that are economically affluent and the countries that are still developing. It has more of a symbolic meaning than a geographical meaning, I would say. Also, I'm not sure if the office building thing originated in Australia. I would have to check that also. But if you're saying, I would believe you on that. And again, the case with Australia is almost similar as US. So what happened there? European countries, they colonized these lands which had a lot of indigenous populations, and then they converted it in their own thing. So US is now, we hardly know about the indigenous population that existed there. It has now become a completely different thing. It was a land which had an indigenous population which was colonized, and then the European people, the European countries, the whites, they changed the entire demographics or the entire history of that place. That's the same thing they have done with Australia. So it's more or less, I would say, come in the same category. But I would definitely read a little more about this thing, and then I would tell you in the next class. If anyone has any questions, you may please ask. The office design came from West in Australia with the concept of. Okay, thank you for the information. I was not aware of this. Yeah, thank you so much, Tamanna. I hope I will get well soon. Yeah, you too. You all have a good evening. If anyone has any questions, you may please ask. You can leave it in the chat box. I would try to answer it to my full capacity. We will wait for another 5 minutes. If nobody has any questions, we would end the meeting. Because nobody has any more questions, we have waited for 15 minutes. I would end the meeting now. See everybody in the next session.